Welcome everyone to episode 29 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Now, if you're just tuning into this podcast for the first time, you're crazy, but if you are, we're going to describe a little bit about what it is. The Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast is all about the average Joe, the average Jill? What would it be?
I guess, yeah, Joe, Jill, Jack, whatever.
The average angler fishing. We don't really talk about any expensive boats because we don't own those. It's very relatable, and we try to keep you guys a little bit entertained as you're driving to work or as you're winding down at the end of the day with a cup of coffee or a beer. So this episode is pretty cool. I know if you listened to last week or if you haven't, I definitely recommend it because we had our special guest, Radio Voice Royce. His voice was way better than us. That was episode 28. That was about backcountry camping and fishing, which is really cool.
One of the funnest episodes to record as well. We didn't film it. Fun. Funnest ones to record.
We recorded that up north in the sticks, 6 hours north. So it was
zero
amazing.
Signal anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I highly recommend you listen to it if you already haven't.
Cut. Just kidding. It was edited.
So 2 podcasts ago, we actually did a podcast about shore casting for salmon, and we actually had a lot of people message us about. We asked a few questions like, what's your favorite lure? Do you have any questions? We got a lot of feedback about that. There's a lot of people in, the GTA or anyone that lives around the Great Lakes that fish for salmon. And I had a lot of people asking about creek fishing. Like, do we creek fish for salmon? And, how do you do it? What do we recommend? So I thought we'd do an episode all about that. What do you think?
I mean, if we must.
Yeah. Well, it is September, so we kind of have to. So anyway, before we do that, Andrew, the man with the mustache, he has a TNT, which is our new segment that just got renamed by a very smart listener, which is called Tactics and Techniques, or Techniques and Tactics. What was it?
Techniques and Tips? I don't know.
It's two T's and an N.
It's
okay.
TNT.
Okay, go ahead. TNT. Blow me away.
Oh, no. We're talking about blowing up. Topwater blow-ups.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Excellent. And you know what? September is the month for topwater, especially for musky.
Yes. So it mainly focuses on pike and musky because I noticed something recently fishing for both species in the past few weeks. My hookup ratio has improved on topwater strikes, specifically spooks, stuff like that. So the regular tips you'll get for topwaters is often, wait for the weight. 100%. Crap, I said it again. You need to follow that because if you wait for the weight, that means that the fish has the bait in its mouth and now it actually hasn't engaged. A lot of time they'll come up like we talked about before, like with frog fishing in the episode. They'll smack it goes flying, and it's don't set the hook obviously because it's not anywhere in their vicinity. It's not in their mouth. It. Yeah. And another thing we've talked about before is fishing spooks, topwater spooks for pike.
Yeah.
And it's fun. And they'll fly after the thing 7 times before they even get it in their mouth. Now, what I've noticed recently is I was just actually back up at the cottage.
Nice.
And
how was it?
It was good. I didn't do as much fishing this time. It was more of a just kind of relaxing trip.
Yeah, you need that.
It was nice. Just very nostalgic to be back in that water.
Nice.
First time taking my boat up there too, so that was nice. Fun.
I haven't been up to your cottage in 15 years, I'd say.
I want to do a trip with you again.
We should.
Just for old time's sake.
Andrew, he doesn't like bringing me to his cottage because I usually catch the biggest fish there. What can I say?
That's not true. So the thing I've noticed is with topwaters, specifically one that I've been using is the Z-Man Hellraiser. It's a new one. I was excited to try it this year, and coming into the end of the summer and fall, I've been using it a lot. And I caught multiple muskie on it on our back lake trip that we did, and we also had I caught multiple pike on it at the cottage this trip, and I was trying to figure out why its hookup ratio is so good, because I didn't miss a single fish on that bait. Like bass and stuff will hit it and they might throw the hook, but I mean the actual hookup on them every single time when they hit that bait. And that was a shock for me, especially at the cottage, catching these 20-inch pike and stuff like that. And this is a topwater bait. It's a long topwater bait, 2 treble hooks. Why is it nailing them every single time? What I have, and I did a bit of research on this as well. So one of the things you can do with spooks or with poppers is you weigh it down so that it sits The tail end sits more into the water. When they come up and hit it, it's not this big flat bar on top of the water that they're just slapping against. It's coming down, and they'll actually have they'll aim for it and just choke the whole thing. And the hookup ratio has been way better, and that's exactly what the Hellraiser does. It sits pretty high up in the water as it shakes back and forth on the surface as it comes in.
It's
and they'll come up from the
down.
bottom. They're coming up from the bottom, and it's pointing right at them. They can get the whole thing in their mouth, and they inhale it every time.
That makes sense.
And so what some guys will do is you can either upgrade your hooks into a bit heavier hooks. That will weight, it'll weight the whole bait down. But if you did just the back one, let's say, with a slightly larger size, as we often recommend, or replace your hooks. Sticky sharp hooks are necessary on a topwater.
Yep.
And it'll weight the back end of it down. And oftentimes it can even help some of the baits walk better if it's weighted down further back. Some of the other baits that you'll find, like the evergreen shower blows, right?
Yeah.
It's evergreen?
Yep.
I think so. The SB, whatever.
SB something. Evergreen, great baits, but they need to come up with better names for the baits. Although shower blows is pretty cool.
It's like the Lexus or BMW of the fishing world. It's like, what do you call this? Like, I call it the I-751. Like, call it a name. So, if you look at some of those, when they sit in the water, they actually sit pretty high up with their popping mouth out of the water. But when you pull it forward, they'll create that popping action. And they'll have a better hookup ratio than the cheaper ones that perhaps don't have the weight transfer system or don't have a lot of rattles in it. The old classic wooden ones, they can work, don't get me wrong. I still have a bunch of them. But if they sit flat in the water, especially in the longer baits like a spook, your hookup ratio will improve if you can get that back end down to sit in the water a bit.
It makes sense, because if you have to think, if you're looking up and you're just seeing the bait flat on the water, you could kind of see where it is, but maybe with light refraction or whatever, it might be confusing as to exactly where it is. But if that thing's butt is hanging down, it's just like on Finding Nemo when he's like, he's gonna touch the butt.
It's exactly like
that. You know, you watch Disney and Pixar movies, it all relates to fishing, guys. Listen.
So that's my little TNT for this trip.
That may be little, but that will have big results.
Yeah.
I was actually, when you were saying why, I honestly was thinking in my head, as I'm like, because that Hellraiser, its butt is further in the water. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Interesting. And another thing that I think too is that Hellraiser, it's a straight retrieval, right?
I love that bait. I'm getting another one.
So you cast it out and you just reel it in. It's kind of like a buzz bait.
Yeah.
It's not like a spook that's zigzagging around on the surface. So if a pike's having a hard time finding something, what's going to be harder to hit? Something zigzagging around or something that's just gurgling in a straight line?
Yeah. And I will say, a couple things that I love about that bait is, one, I went musky fishing with the regular hooks. And I did land a musky, but those hooks were trashed.
They were completely bent out. Yeah.
So I had to replace them with some heavier gauge hooks. It still works, even with some, it's got a legit musky treble hook in that middle now.
Yeah.
And it still has no problem walking.
Yeah.
The other cool thing with it is, because of that heavy weight, that thing casts a mile. It's got rattles inside of it too. That is a heavy, it's probably the heaviest topwater I've ever used.
Yeah.
For it's the size of it. It's got a huge lead weight on the back. So when you cast that thing, I was firing this thing like 80, 100 feet. It's gone. And you get to reel in on top of the weeds the whole way. It was really awesome. And even doing short casts, it loads up like a nice heavy action rod. If you're fishing around structure with it, you can use your heavy action rod. It loads up nice on a light cast, and you're really accurate cast with it, even short range. So I really like that thing.
Yeah, and unlike other people that'll recommend lures of companies they're sponsored by, we buy our own lures. So if we're telling you something works, it's because we've caught fish on it. And I'll tell you, Andrew bought this thing, the Hellraiser, and I was like, I could see it working, but there's so many lures, right? I'm just like, I already have so many topwaters. And he goes and smashes two of the biggest muskies of the trip last week on it. And I'm like, all right, now I have to get one. So Andrew is literally helping me become poorer, more poor.
And then Jesse is in turn inviting me onto the podcast to then tell all of you, so we can all collectively get poorer.
Yes, because we care about you. We want you to be poorer like us. Anyway, that was a good one. So we're going to get into our main topic of creek fishing for salmon, creeks, rivers, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to talk out of our butt. We're going to talk about what we know. And if what we're saying to you about what we know applies to where you fish, that's great. If it doesn't exactly apply, Like, we don't fish huge rivers, so we're not going to pretend we do. But use the information that we're giving you and then adapt it to where you're fishing. Because it's going to be different. Like, if you're fishing a tiny creek and then you're fishing the Niagara River, not the same. Not the same.
I think we should talk out of our butts like Ace Ventura. Be like, lend me your rears.
How to get canceled 101.
Yeah.
So I just have a few questions like about salmon fishing in the creeks. And again, we talked about shore casting for salmon. That's my favorite way to catch salmon. Actually, my favorite way to catch them is like in a small boat in the river mouth, but that's a different topic. But why? Why do you think it's so popular to catch salmon in the creeks?
Because river mouths have a very limited shoreline. Because there's a river and a mouth. You can't stand in the actual mouth of the river itself, so you're just in the outskirts of it. There's not a whole lot of territory for people who don't have access to boats, especially boats that can go on a lake that has salmon in it, or the ocean, right? But once they come in shore, the shoreline of a river, it's all shoreline. So your accessibility just skyrocketed. And I think that's the thing is it's a very short time you can get these things, but it's the same reason why bears are out there, in BC doing it. They get them when they're in the creeks because they're accessible. Yeah. They're not out there swimming in 200-foot swells
in the ocean,
diving down to find these like schools of salmon,
getting eaten by killer whales.
So for us regular average anglers, the fall is the time when the salmon are coming in, and we can actually access them. And in the creek you have a lot more territory that you can actually, have a chance of getting a spot and targeting these fish. That would be my theory.
Yeah, and for me, I would add to that, definitely accessibility. It's the one time of year when these giant fish are, you could say, like at grasps. Like you could grasp them, like pretty much. You could scoop them up with a net. Some people do, but illegal. But anyway, they're so accessible. Number two is like you don't need a lot of expensive gear. Like you say, you don't need a boat. You don't need like downriggers. You don't need all that stuff. But even compared to casting at the river mouth, fishing the creeks, it's very visual. It's exciting. You're seeing, all these fish in shallow water, fairly shallow water, which we're going to get into the ethics about this too in a bit. But it is the time when these giant fish are in a very small area and they're easier to target than you'd normally be able to for the average person. Now, the main question I get all the time, and this, you could have a whole podcast about this question: do salmon bite in the creeks? Because I'll tell you, again, I used to work at a few tackle shops. We've been doing fishing Instagram for years, and I always get people that are like, oh man, I don't know why people fish the creeks. Salmon don't bite in the creeks. They don't bite in the creeks. And I look at their account and they don't even salmon fish. It's like, okay, like you're guessing. Okay. My theory is I was fishing the creeks since I was allowed down there when I was like 12, 13 years old. I do feel, getting into the ethics of it, I think a lot of people, and I'm saying this very politely, I think a lot of people unintentionally floss or snag salmon in the mouth. They don't know they don't know that they're doing it. They don't do it purposefully. They're set up, and shallow water and big salmon swimming with their mouths open, it happens. So when I see guys or girls that are like, you know what, I had a great day, I smashed like 30 salmon. I'm like, you didn't. I guarantee you didn't. There's no way, because I'll tell you why. Do salmon bite? I have a perfect example of this. Again, I've been fishing the creeks for years. One of the best ways to prove that salmon bite is bring a crankbait or a small spinner down to the creek.
Little flatfish.
Go there and wobble that thing through a deep pool and watch the kings, or especially cohos, love spinners and cranks. They just swim up. And most of the time, I say 95% of the time, they swim up to it and then they turn away at the last minute.
Yeah.
But they will smash it. I've seen it with my own eyes. You can look it up on YouTube where guys will have they'll GoPro the whole thing and they're reeling a spinner through a pool and a big king will just come up and smash it.
Yeah. You'll see them fly out of the pocket.
They don't bite, do they? They do. It's on film. It happens. People fish for them. They do bite. Now, the main thing is, do they eat? No, they don't eat. And I'll tell you why. I have a buddy that told me, they were fishing out on a charter. And this was like late July, early August, and he's like, the fish that they're catching, the kings that are out there already, they're not eating. They have nothing in their stomach at that point in time. I don't know how true this is, but they said at that time they're already stopped eating. Will they hit a bait? Yes, they will. 100%. Are they eating? No. So there's a difference. You have to understand there's a difference between eating and striking a bait. Salmon are very aggressive. You have to think they're so hopped up on hormones. If you reel something noisy, like if you're fishing the river mouth and they're going to hit spoons and crankbaits and annoying lures, They swim 100 feet up the creek and all of a sudden they don't bite. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen. So in my opinion, in my humble opinion, they do bite in the creeks. Again, we're going to get into the little bit of the ethics about it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there are a lot of ways that people catch salmon that is not ethical, and it's not you're basically not making them bite. You're just flossing them, or what's called. It's
Do you want
basically
to define flossing, or
yeah. Why don't you define flossing? Because that happens all the time.
yeah. So you might be picturing yourself getting that piece of like string and like whipping it between your teeth and your mouth. It's pretty much the same thing.
You're supposed to floss every day, but you're not supposed to floss salmon.
That's correct.
Now,
Yeah.
is it illegal to floss salmon?
That's the 1 out of 5 dentists does recommend flossing salmon, but we don't like him.
Yeah.
We never listen to him.
Yeah.
Why should we start now?
Yeah.
So flossing salmon, because the salmon come into the creek, the males especially develop what's called like a kype jaw.
Yeah.
And their bottom jaw deforms and get this big hook in the front. And their mouth is just opening and closing in the creek the whole time. So if you're fishing and there's shallow water, you've got 12 inches of water, you have your weight tumbling down here, and then you got 16 inches of line, and you have a marshmallow on a hook, and it's floating down. You now have a line or a floss that's just drifting down the creek, and all these salmon with their mouths open, it just goes into the mouth, and you start pulling it, and it just hooks into generally from the outside into the mouth. That's the way you can tell if you flossed a fish accidentally. You may not be trying to. You can catch them on rope. They can eat them.
As your bobber's floating down, it'll pull the line through the mouth. You can tell, like you said, if they're hooked on the outside of the corner of the lip, but you can also hook them on the inside of the corner lip too.
It could drift in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Now, that's unintentional. It happens all the time. I almost guarantee some of the salmon that I've caught in the past are unintentionally flossed. Like, there's nothing around it. If you're fishing a pool that has 75 salmon swimming in it, what are the odds that that's going to happen? It's going to happen. Okay?
Yes.
There are people that intentionally do it, and you'll see them. You'll see them on social media and stuff. You see them at the creek, and you'll see them with really long leaders and just like a really bright like fly, something that's not even something you use for salmon fishing. And you'll see them just drifting in front of a fish's face, and then they'll just like jerk the rod, or like jerk the rod, just to hook it in the mouth.
Yeah.
And it's like you're snagging fish. So to get into the whole ethics of it, I can see why. If you're someone that's like, you know what, I'm totally against salmon fishing in the creeks. I understand. I agree with you 95%. Okay. There are a lot of anglers out there that do it ethically. And I feel like there's a big percentage of people that just don't know what the heck they're doing. They're catching fish, but they're doing it sketchily, you could say. And then there are a big percentage of people that are bad apples that just are crap. They're snagging fish on
absolute
purpose.
Poachers who aren't even hiding what they're doing.
Yeah,
But
like,
we'll get into that.
I just saw a video on Sticks and Stones on Instagram. Some guy literally spearing salmon at the steps at the Ganawasca.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh my goodness. Anyway, so like, I think that's the one thing. And the other thing we're going to get into, the next point I had is turnoffs, like things that just people, like for instance, the last 2 years, I haven't really fished the creeks for salmon. I used to do it all the time. We used to go all the time. And the last 2 years since Andrew got a boat and I had a boat too, September has really been a musky month for us. And all my days, like we work full time. So if we have a day off on the weekend, it's like salmon fishing is great. I have nothing against people that go salmon fishing, but I've already lived that life for years. I'm just like been there, done that. Okay. That's me personally. I want to go musky fishing. Like that's our newest obsession. So Andrew's like, hey, want to go out and rip around in the boat and try to catch a muskie and probably not catch anything? Absolutely. Or do you want to stand shoulder to shoulder in the creek and fish in like 3 feet of water with like 50 half rotting kings swimming around? I get it. That being said, I don't want to sound all snobby, but there are good times to go salmon fishing in the creeks. Like, remember that one time we went out?
I hope you're going to bring this up.
I'll tell you a story. This is how enjoyable
I've got a few now, because we have done creek fishing for salmon. We have a few stories. I got a couple I do want to tell on this podcast, but go ahead with this one first.
Okay, so this is, I'd say, a good example. So I'm not a guide. I'm not a guide at all, but I kind of view myself as a guide sometimes when I take people out that either like Andrew, who has never salmon fished before, or my buddies who have never fished before. And I'll be like, I'll set you up. I'll bring all the gear. I'll bring the bait, everything. You just literally come and I'll get you on fish. I can almost guarantee it. And me and Andrew went down and I had this stretch of river that we always fish. It's not super shallow. It's got a lot of really deep corners, some big pools, and there was a ton of fish there, a ton of them. And they were stacked in there, but not super thick yet.
So this wasn't my first time salmon fishing.
First time float fishing.
This is the term, first time float fishing.
Float fishing, like center pin fishing. And I had a big bag of skein, which is basically when you get a salmon before its eggs are all loose in its belly, they're all together in a skein or a skein. and it's just like a big membraned piece of eggs. And basically what you do is you cure that, and then you cut it into chunks and use that as bait. And that is my favorite way to catch salmon. Because
it's going to sound weird, but it's kind of like if you ever had actually opened a pomegranate yourself, all those little like pomegranate kernels are all attached to like an inner membrane.
Yeah.
That's like the skein. And then once you've broken off all the little kernels and you buy them like all loose and it's pomegranate kernels, that's like the roe when it's released.
Yeah. And another way to understand it too is like, imagine a salmon, a female salmon, obviously, and they have the eggs grow on a membrane in their belly. Okay. And they start growing months before this. So as the spawning season is coming, those eggs are still in tight membranes. But as the season progresses, the membrane starts to, I don't know if it disintegrates or starts to shrink, and the eggs basically eventually become loose and are just sitting in the belly, and then when they spawn, they just come out.
One of the theories, as well as the females will often, you'll see salmon jumping and stuff. One of the theories, I haven't heard of it ever being confirmed scientifically or not, but that them jumping and landing is actually them trying to loosen up their eggs.
I've heard that, yeah. So oftentimes you'll see them jumping at the lake or at the harbor, and they're just jumping for no reason, like 10 times in a row, and you're like, okay, it's either just really happy or it's trying to break up its eggs. But anyway, when
or
those...
a lamprey.
Yeah, you usually see that though. But anyway, skein, however you pronounce it, a lot of guys call it whichever way, a big chunk. And I'm not talking a little like roe bag. I'm talking like a golf ball sized piece, like a big chunk. And you have a big single hook, and you have this thing called an egg loop on your hook. We'll get into that. And you basically, when the water's murky and you drop that in the water, it just milks. It's just like all the scent just, you just see this big like cloud around your bait.
Yeah.
And you'll be fishing in pretty murky water, like not chocolate milk, but pretty murky.
Yeah.
And we can see kings swimming around, not very clearly though where they are. And we're drifting these big chunks. And I have a big feeling that salmon find the stream that they're born in by the sense of smell. I think smell is super important for salmon. I think that sense on baits and lures is very important. And those big chunks of skein, like I've fished with that and roe bags, and the guy fishing skein 10-1. Easy. Like, I don't know. It's just like when you have that day when they're hitting skein, it's just like insane. So we go down anyway, me and Andrew, and we're fishing like, fairly big floats because we're using big chunks. And it was this nice corner, and it's just like drifting, and you just see your float, and you can't see any fish underneath, and all of a sudden it just like boom, it bangs down. And it's like, okay, that didn't literally slide through something's mouth. That fish just grabbed it.
Yeah.
And I think that day we caught, it was a lot. It was at least a dozen.
Oh yeah.
It was a dozen.
I think I caught 7 and you caught like 8 or 9.
And you'll have guys be like, you're just snagging fish in the mouth. It's like, okay, but when I reel in these fish, it's down by their throat. They tried to swallow it. So, and I've gone days when the water's clear, and I'll literally drift down like a line where there's a bunch of salmon, and I'll see them like swim in front of it and grab it.
I've seen it. On a couple of them that I caught that day, it was a poor cast because again, I'm just new to the float fishing, and so the current pushes it out of the pool, out of the big eddy coming down, and it pushes it off to the side, and all of a sudden you see this like huge shadow just come over and just like slide right out like 6 feet, just inhale it and go back into the pool.
I think they
like
can
he's
smell
not. I didn't line that thing. It came over to grab it and went back. Like there's no saying he didn't purposefully bite onto that. And every single one, they're not deep down the throat. They were well within the mouth, inside to out.
Yeah,
every
they're
single
trying to
one.
swallow it. Yeah. Now the thing is with fishing bait, a lot of people will be like, "Well, where do you get skein?" The thing is, you can't buy it at the store. You got to catch a salmon in the lake, usually from the pier or from a guy in a boat that goes out. Sometimes they sell it. I don't know if you can legally sell it, but I know some guys will go out on a charter. They'll get skein. They'll give it to their buddies. Yeah. Usually where we get skein is like when we catch 1 or 2 fish off the pier early season, and we'll keep a female. We'll smoke the fish. We're not just keeping it for the eggs. We'll smoke the fish if it's fresh, and then we'll keep the skein. And we don't fish a ton anymore at the creek, so 1 female with skein that'll do us for the month of September, early October. Another way you can catch fish on skein, we're not going to get into this, is in the river mouth. You can actually just hang it. They call it like hanging cherries, like hanging berries down at the harbor. Find a nice spot where the salmon are, you'll see them just swim around. Just hang it there, and they come up and boom, they grab it. Anyway, it's an insane bite. I mean, if you're asking like, where can I get some skein? Like, you can't just go to the store, unfortunately. But next best thing would be a big roe bag if the water's murky, and treat it just like steelhead fishing. Like if it's clear water, use a smaller roe bag. there's still scent in those eggs. Not as much as skein. Skein's just literally like a scent ball. It's like, poof, and this stuff smells like your hands get covered in.
If you ever like you're feeling like your motor or something in the boat, or even some of the bait oils and whatnot, and you'll spray it on the water. You'll see a bit drip into the water, and it just see those like that iridescent pool just grow. And you're like, whoa, that seems like a lot. It's like one droplet. When you drop skein in, it's like this milky white, just like, poof, like cloud, it's a cloud. It is noticeable that
and
it's there.
And the cure that we use pot skis. It's smelly. It's got like, I think some kind of shrimp flavoring, because it's like made for BC. Shrimp flavoring, and it's basically borax and sugar and salt, and it smells terrible, and it dyes your fingers pink. So a lot of people use rubber gloves. I brought my float rod. I actually left it over there, but the whole handle, I just scrubbed it down because it was literally caked in this nasty stuff. And I have a cheaper float reel that I have. We'll talk about that in a sec. But I'm like, I don't want to use my nice Islander because it just gets caked. But anyway, we're not going to go that far into skein, because skein, if you can get it, it's great. It's amazing. It does work. Fish do bite it. We've seen it with our own eyes. If you don't believe it, I don't know what to tell you. Another thing you can use is flies. A lot of guys use flies.
That was my first time salmon fishing with you. We were fly fishing.
Yeah. And this, I will not be too ashamed to admit, when I first started fly fishing for salmon, I almost guarantee I was lining a lot of fish when I was young, when I was like a young teenager. And then it came to me like, I was just like, one day I was like, what the heck am I snagging fish? Like, I literally thought that. I was young, and I was like, am I snagging fish? Because I was just like casting kind of like at an angle across, and then like stripping it across the current.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like you'd see a fish swim up and grab it, which is exciting.
Yes.
But other times you wouldn't, and it would just be like a fish just like all of a sudden hooked. So I'm like, I see a lot of guys doing that, a lot of anglers fishing, and they're like, I'm fly fishing. Salmon love flies. I'm like, if they're just sitting there in the current, minding their own business, and you whip a fly across their face and line them through the mouth, they're going to get hooked. And then, see, that's the ethics part of it. You really, I think it's one of the biggest types of fishing where you literally have to look at your technique and be like, what am I doing? Like, am I doing it sketchy, even unintentionally, or am I doing this legit? It's like, how would you say is the most legit way to fly fish?
So that's what you taught me was we used like something big, hairy, like a woolly bugger. Very accessible, easy to tie if you can do your own too. So you cast it out, and let's say the salmon is sitting right in the current. If you cast out and you just swing it in front of his face, so your line is never actually reaching him. So you're at no risk of, if you're targeting a specific fish, which I love to target this individual fish, not just in the pool,
because you can annoy one, and
and he'll see him, and he might like swing his head at it and just move away, and like, all right, I'm casting there now. And I'll focus on one fish for like 15-20 minutes, just swinging this big black woolly bugger in front of his face, and eventually this guy just gets so fed up, he just swims up next time it comes by and just nails it. You'll see him come up and eat it, because I am never drifting it down lower into it actually to line him. It's always just coming by like an inch or 2 inches right in front of his nose, just swinging by him in the current. Oh no, poor loon. Andrew
just knocked over our loon mascot.
So that is, I would say, the most effective way to fly fish, and you're at least in the 100% ethical way, because you're not lining fish either.
Now, is that to be said that you can't wet fly drift, like drift down at an angle across a bunch of salmon and one won't smack it? No, that's the thing with fishing, with salmon fishing. There's no way to prove how you caught the fish generally. So a lot of people will be like, oh, that's how you snag fish, or this is how you do that, or the way I do it is better. It's like, you have to not worry about other people.
Hold yourself accountable.
Hold yourself accountable. So flies are cool, like you said, woolly buggers. I like black with a red head, like the egg sucking leech kind of. I find like small egg flies and nymphs, I'm sure they work. But when we're trying to do what Andrew talked about, annoying a fish, like we're working on their aggressive, like think of it, the males are just like, they're so pumped up, and you see the salmon fighting, right? They're fighting each other, they're biting each other. So if you have a big flashy gaudy fly and you just keep drifting in front of their face, you're going to eventually annoy them, and they will hit. I've seen it. Another way I've seen guys do it, and it's super exciting, it's kind of like fishing a spinner where you just cast it through a pool and reel it in, and sometimes the salmon will swim after it. Is you get a big streamer, sometimes like a bunny, like a streamer, like a zonker or something like that, and you cast it through a pool, and then you just strip it through really fast. And I'll tell you, one fish that literally just loves chasing is coho salmon. Cohos are insane. My biggest coho I caught,
they're still on my list to catch. Yeah.
They're beautiful. Like Chinook, yeah, they're cool, but once you start fishing a lot, you're kind of, I find people go kings, and then eventually they're like, okay, I want to catch coho, and then they're like Atlantics, Yeah. But cohos are my favorite for sure. They fight like heck. They're actually very aggressive. Like if you can see a coho, because they do look visually different than kings, obviously. They do like chasing. So one time I was fishing, I caught my biggest one. I was using a pink woolly bugger with a green tungsten bead. I used to work at a fly fishing place. I used to tie flies like during work because it was slow because no one fly fishes. But anyway, I had a whole box. I still have probably hundreds of them. Yeah. And I was just casting this and stripping it through this, like, I don't know, 3-4 foot. And this coho came out of nowhere. I didn't even see him, and just crushed it. And I was just like, I was kind of like caught off guard, and I set the hook, and this fish jumped like 15 times. And I was using a 7-weight fly rod. It wasn't even a heavy fly rod. And this thing was like, jump, boom, jump, boom. And I was like, what the heck? And I'm running down the stream, right? And I finally got it in the net, and it was beautiful. It was a male. And the males, they have like dark olive backs and like pink sides. Mm-hmm. I literally was like, this is the best fish I've ever caught in my life. Mm-hmm. And I threw it back, swam away. But another example, and getting kind of away from flies and talking more about that annoyance, is like lures. Yeah. So I have another story about lures.
So do I.
With coho?
Not with coho.
Okay, I'll tell my coho stories first. So I was fishing the same creek, but way higher. Me and my dad were trout fishing, not even for salmon. We were fishing like the last day of trout season, way up at the top of one of these creeks. And my dad had a pack of worms, as he normally does, and I had some Panther Martin spinners and some Blue Fox spinners. And the salmon generally don't come up this far, this little creek. It was like way up, but we had this big rain, and the salmon went really far up. And my dad's fishing this like deep hole he normally fishes for browns, and he's like, oh man, I hooked a huge salmon. And I was like, no, there's no salmon up here. It's way too far. The creek's like literally 6-7 feet wide. And I look, and he has this huge Chinook on. It ate a worm. I'm not joking. He was fishing a deep pool on the bottom. He bottom fishes. So there's no way he flossed it. Yeah. This thing ate a worm, and he fought it, and it snapped him off because he was using an ultralight trout rod, right? Yeah. And then I see splashing coming up the creek, and I look, and there's like 3 fish, and they're all cohos. It was like 3 cohos, and I think 1 was a male and 2 were a female. And I chucked my spinner. I had a Blue Fox number 2 or something like that. I chucked it downstream, and I reeled it in, and this fish literally just swam up and smacked it. First cast. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it missed it. And I was like shaking because I was like 14 years old, and I reeled it in, and I cast it again. And the second cast, it smoked it. And I got it in. Terrible picture because, cell phones didn't exist back then with like actual good cameras on it. But my dad had like one of those wind-up cameras. Took a picture, but anyway. That was my coho story, but cohos love chasing lures. Little crankbaits, like you said, flatfish. Yep. Little spinners, I'd say Blue Fox, like I'd say 2, 3s, even 4s, but 3s is a good size. Andrew's trying to kill a fly over here.
Kept landing on my microphone and like really distracting me. If you watch the video, I'm just like cross-eyed for the last 5 minutes. I'm just like staring at this thing.
So anyway, I've done well with spinners. I've done well with flatfish for salmon, especially kings. Just how would you fish a flatfish for salmon?
So
it's exciting.
I love, again, flatfish is amazing because it's just annoying. So I'll hold my rod. I like to use a bit longer rod. And again, you generally salmon fishing, you're going to have one. Yeah. And I'll just hold it in front of the fish's face in the current. I won't reel in. I'll just cast out. I'll reel in. So it's just, if I can reach to the center of the creek or wherever that fish is sitting in that current, I just hold the rod there and just have this bait just waggling in front of his face, just holding it there, and I'll pull it forward and then swing it back and pull it forward and swing it back. Again, it's never leaving this fish's sight. Yeah. And it's just sending off vibrations right in front of their face.
And the fish is going to move to the side to get out of the way.
And just pull my rod in.
Right in front of him.
Push it out, whatever. And it just keeps this thing as close to this fish's face for as long as possible.
Annoy the heck out of him.
And then he'll just come up and kill it.
Yeah.
And I think it was actually a flatfish that I was using. So I'm going to tell my story now. We were fishing a creek, not too far north, but it was north of the tracks for sure. And what happened was I had hooked into a fish, and my line got snagged on as it went to take some line out of the spinning reel. It got snagged on my reel. It went underneath, like right where the bail comes in. It got snagged in a little like opening where the bail connects. Ugh. And so it was like ding, just snapped, and I was like, oh no! Like I finally got a salmon on a lure. And this thing just snapped instantly. So we kept fishing. We fished up. or coming back maybe about an hour later, and we would wet wade through the pools because I still don't own a pair of waders.
Yeah.
And so I'm coming across, and all of a sudden I feel something on my leg. And I'm waiting below this pool again. And I look down and something's touching my leg, but nothing's there. So I reach in the water, pull it up, and it's fishing line. So what I do is I re-rig my same rod. So I bite the end of the line off. I just do quick 2 uni knots on it, and I just reel in, and the salmon's still on.
Wow.
So we actually landed the salmon. It wasn't like too big. I think it was weighed 20 pounds maybe.
Yeah.
But I actually still landed the fish. It hadn't thrown the hook, and it's been sitting in this current in this pool. But the line, because it snapped off at my reel, there was like 30 feet of line behind it. So the whole time trying to tie it, I'm like, please don't run up to the next pool while I have this in my hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it tied on, just slowly reeled in until it was the weight, and I just set the hook again, and I was on. So that was one of the times that I actually lost the fish and then was able to retie onto the broken line and catch it.
We've done that before. Yeah, that's hilarious. And it happens all the time. Like, these fish are insane. And I think some people that just first get into it, they're not ready. They're like, how bad could it be? It's like, you're hooking a fish that's like 20 to 30 pounds of pure muscle.
Yeah.
And you're using 6-pound line. So anyway, there's lots of techniques how to catch them, like fish eggs, skein, flies, lures. People fish pink worms, tons of stuff you could fish. Basically anything natural or flashy that you drift in front of their face will catch fish. And again, if you're one of those persons that's like, fish never bite in the creeks, try to be slightly open-minded. They obviously do. Again, I don't think they bite as much as people think they do. Some people think they do. So if you're catching way too many fish, you're either amazing at fishing or you should maybe look at the way you're doing it. And we're not saying that judgingly. I'm just saying I did that myself, and I realized that, I have to change what I'm doing because it's not possibly ethical. Anyway, a lot of people, what I tell people is if you catch a lot of salmon but you can't catch steelhead, you're probably flossing salmon because they're very similar fish, and you fish the same areas of the same creeks just different times of the year, except you can't floss steelhead.
Yeah.
So take that with a grain of salt. But anyway.
and another bait that I have seen them use way too much is a number 10 massive treble hook wrapped in lead weight and using 120-pound braid on a surf rod.
Yeah.
That's called a poacher.
Yeah.
And if you see anyone doing that, you call MNR right away.
Yeah. We'll actually put a link for the MNR in the link below. Mm-hmm. And I definitely would go to the website, save the number in your phone, because unfortunately it's a gong show out there sometimes.
Have we talked about turnoffs? Because like for me, one of the big things too for that is like I understand that poaching happens all the time. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But most of the time you're not aware of it. When you're salmon fishing and you walk by and you see, and I've seen it more than once, like 25 fish strung up on a rope. Half of them are males with just their sperm sacs just all hanging out too, because they can't identify a male and a female, even when they're pretty easy to identify.
They're trying to get the eggs and they're killing males, which are easily identifiable.
And there's just some guy with like 20 fish behind him, or like hung up on a rope, just rotting away because all their bellies cut open, nothing else. Like that. Yeah. That turns me off of fishing for the day when I see stuff like that. It's like I don't want to. Yeah. And the people like that are doing that, and this is not it's not like bad to say because they're 100% in the wrong. People like that give a really bad name to anglers everywhere.
Yeah, even though they're not anglers.
Yeah. And the other thing too that's a big turnoff is people who litter. Like people who have, I'm going to buy, some roe or hooks or weights, my leader line, my spools, they take their coffee with them into the bush or walk in the creek. The creeks get littered like tremendously. Oh, my net breaks. I'll just leave this in a tree. Like, yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. There are a lot of dirt bags out there.
Thankfully, there's also a lot of guys, and you'll see them on Instagram, and they'll have their posts as like, carry out what you bring in, and they bring out more. They bring a trash bag with them,
or they fill their net.
And these guys, they'll have a bag full of other people's trash because they feel the same way. Like that's just not good to be littering like that. And again, that's how you get creeks closed. That's how you get the bylaws in place that no more public access to this whole stretch that you've been fishing for generations, maybe.
Yep. And it happens. Yeah. And another thing I would say about picking up garbage is, depending on what creek you fish, be very careful.
Yeah.
There are a lot of needles and stuff, especially if you fish like, we're going to say Oshawa Creek. Anyway. So that is another turnoff. And I think one turnoff that a lot of people may have, I know salmon fishing and steelhead fishing, it's a very social sport. Mm-hmm. So like you go out with a group of your guy friends or your friends and you go out like, 3-4 of you and you go fish pools and you talk and you smoke, whatever you do, like you shouldn't smoke. It's bad for your health. But it's a social thing. Guys go out there and they have a good time. Some people like to fish by themselves, just like to relax. And that may not be a thing when it's salmon fishing. There are spots you can definitely find that are less pressured. Like if you're fishing the steps of the Ganney, if you're not familiar with that, it's a lower section in Port Hope. It's an amazing creek, except it gets
And if anyone tries to get mad at us for like, you just burned my spot, like, have you ever been there like on any day ever in the
type
salmon
in
season?
salmon creek fishing Ontario, the Ganaraska is the first thing to come up. Also, the Ganaraska I used to live in Port Hope. I've seen more crap happen in that creek. We used to just sit at the picnic tables and watch the creek. I know some guys do, and they film like literally poachers all day long.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, everyone's like, call the MNR. There's not enough of them out there to unfortunately, to police everything. But there are turnoffs to salmon fishing. And as we mentioned before, we've had some great experiences over the years fishing the creeks. We're going to kind of get into gear.
Okay.
So when I started out fishing, float fishing, I didn't have a center pin when I was young. I had a spinning reel and a long rod. I had a float rod with a spinning reel on it. And if that's what you have, that's great. It's fine. I find salmon when you're fishing, especially big chunks of skein or you're chucking spinners, like a 9.5 to 10.5 foot rod with a spinning reel is great because you can do everything on it. You can chuck lures with it. You can drift with it. It may not be the best for either of those things, but it's definitely doable. And I think that one day we were out a few years ago, we were just using spinning reels and 10.5 foot rods.
I was actually using the rod because you gave it to me that day, I think. The rod that I now use for shore casting for salmon too. Yeah. It is stiffer. The tip had broken off, so I just repaired it. Yeah. But it's a little bit stiffer than I would recommend perhaps in a creek because you're oftentimes using a bit lighter leader than you are for casting, short casting for salmon. But again, I just made sure I didn't set the hook as hard. Yeah. And it still served me well. You have a lot of control on the fish in the creek with that rod then. Yeah. So you can do it. It's completely passable. Not the best setup. Exactly. It gets you on the water and it will help you to actually, it's not like an underpowered rod. At least you're not underpowered.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things I see that is a mistake, or not a mistake, it's just something that I feel is done incorrectly, is a lot of people will use the same gear for salmon that they do for steelhead. Mm-hmm. And again, if you can only afford one combo, do it. But if you can afford to get two separate combos, because like steelhead generally are much smaller, like rainbow trout. They're, 5 to 7 pounds on average, maybe less than that. Salmon average 15 to 22 pounds. So, and you have a good chance at hooking a 30 pound plus fish. So if you're using like 4 or 6 pound line to catch these fish, generally I find it's not necessary. I went through phases where I was trying like fluorocarbon and I was like, I can use 10 pound fluorocarbon leaders on 14 pound main line, like on my float fishing gear. Cause I have a heavier float rod. I have a medium. It's a salmon float rod. And I would be able to get a fish in so fast. Like people will be fighting their fish like, yeah, it was a 25-minute fight. I'm like, yeah, because you're using such light gear. The fish is probably going to die when you release it. It might swim away fine, but it may, have the built up lactic acid and it's so stressed. And you've held it out of the water for all these pictures and then you throw it back, it swims away. And then next thing you know, it's drifting upside down the creek. So when I catch a salmon in the creek, I want to get it in not super fast, but I want to have gear that I'm not going to get my butt whooped. So I'm going to talk about this gear for a second. Yep. I'm just going to grab it. So that's me getting out of a chair because I'm old.
And in the meantime, while Jesse's grabbing that, I have another story about my first salmon I ever caught.
Nope, I'm back. Just kidding.
So we were creek fishing. And it was late in the season. We were actually going for browns, but there was still some salmon in the creek, and they were like dirty boots.
I think it was like late October, early November. Yeah.
And there's this big salmon that he probably would have been, especially in his prime, 25 pounds? Yep. He was a big buck. And I see this thing sitting in this riffles, and it's just like kind of barely sitting there. And I cast out with the row bag, let it drift, and he comes over and he just like I'm pretty sure that fish I lined, I'll be honest, because he's just like sitting there and the row bag just drifted right into his face, and I was like, hey, set the hook on this thing. Now, here's what I saw before it came out of the water was it was black and had a big white spot on the tail.
Yeah.
We call those zombie salmon.
Yep.
And what happened was I set the hook, and this thing, like, it turned its head, it went like 1, 2 shakes, and then rolled onto its side and then floated dead downstream.
Yeah.
It literally died as soon as I hooked this thing. And Jesse and I are killing ourselves laughing. And just like the first salmon I catch died instantly. So I just reel this thing in, which is really hard to reel like 25 pounds of dead weight up current. Yeah. With its mouth like hanging open, trying to spiral around in the water. But I got it in, and I got a photo. In my first salmon, I'm like, I want a photo of it. It'd be funny. I never posted
photo.
it. It's bad.
Yeah.
But I wrapped my hand around the tail. I put my hand on the belly, and as I grabbed the tail, I just felt the whole tail just kind of like smush in my hand. It was so gross. I'm like, I'll gotta cover this white spot so it doesn't look as bad in the photo. And, it was such a like disgusting experience holding this old salmon.
What Andrew's describing is a lot of what I see posted on social media. Guys holding up salmon that are like half rotted, and they're like, caught this beast in the creek today. It's like,
yeah,
that's disgusting.
Yeah.
Like
the other side of the fish in that photo is way worse.
Yeah. So I think too, to add to the turn-offs of salmon fishing in the creeks, and again, I don't know if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, wow, these guys are being super negative about creek fishing. It's just because there's a lot of negative things to it.
Yeah.
If you're looking in from
there's
the
a lot
outside.
of, we will touch after Jesse goes on over this thing, we'll talk about some positives though.
Yeah.
At the end.
Well, we've been kind of going through like all these stories,
Yeah.
like we've had, except for that one, we've had good experiences doing it. It is a great way to catch fish, but I do see a lot of people targeting literally rotting salmon with mold on them in shallow water, or people fishing for salmon that are literally spawning on their beds.
Yeah.
They're on their beds, laying their eggs like on their reeds or whatever, and
they're trying to line.
They're lining them on their bed. It's like, come on, and they're like, oh, it's not against the law. It's like, just because something's not against the law doesn't mean you should do it. A lot of people, though, unfortunately, salmon season, I find, brings a lot of the deadbeats out of the woodworks. Mm-hmm. It's like people that don't fish for anything else because they can't, afford a boat or a car. And then
they don't have skill, so all they do is line fish.
Yeah, they're like, well, it's creek time.
Now, I'm not saying all salmon anglers are those people.
But there are a lot of them.
But there are a lot of people that only fish salmon and are those people. That's all. That's just to clarify. There are guys who only fish salmon, and they do so ethically, and they're awesome, and they're amazing at it.
Yeah. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're definitely someone that's serious about fishing, and you're not one of those people. We're not saying that at all.
And we hope that you take everything that we say with a grain of salt, but also listen to it and take it to heart, and don't be idiots out there.
Yeah. So for gear, we talked about spinning gear. I'm going to go over briefly. We get a lot of messages after a podcast. Like, I just got a bunch about like our flippy, pitchy, punchy episode, like literally just the other day. And they're like, oh, what do you recommend for this? I was like, that was like 5 weeks ago. But anyway, if you have any questions, send us a message. We'll help you out if we can. Again, I've worked at a tackle shop. I know what people buy. If you're looking at a spinning rod to cast spinners, crankbaits, you probably can use your shore fishing rod. I'd recommend ideally maybe a medium light spinning rod. Something that can handle like 6 to 10 pound line ish. And you can get away with a 2,500 size reel in the creeks, like a spinning reel. 4,000 is fine too. And I'd load that up with.
I like the 4,000 just because
better drag,
a bit smoother when they do. Again, they're not running as long.
And then plus it's a great crossover reel for shore casting for salmon. So just get one. And I'd load that for the creeks. I like 10 pound mono. 10 pound mono. That's all you need for chucking spinners. If you're float fishing, I would use a leader, like your main line is 10 pound, and then have a little micro swivel, and then attach maybe an 8 or 6 pound leader, depending on if it's super gin clear water and you cannot get them to bite, drop down to 6 or 7 pound. But generally I'm going to start at 8, even 10 if I can get away with it. And I've had days where it's like we're fishing murky water with skein. I'll use 12. I don't care. When I hook that fish, it's in the net in like 1 minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On my salmon reel, it's a 4,000, and I have 12 pound mono that I use it for shore casting primarily. And then when I go to the creek, I throw the exact same reel on and just tie on a leader to it.
Yeah, exactly.
The main line doesn't matter.
It
holds so much line, it holds anyways.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't impede my casting or anything like that. And I tie in on just a nice leader, and I'm good to go with that.
All right, so this is my this is what I call my salmon beater. This is my float rod combo that I use just specifically for salmon. And again, we've been buying fishing gear for years. I've been collecting rods. I've 50 rods at least, and like it's insane. But I bought this from Fish Heads Canada, and it's a Raven. And I was really surprised that recently, like when I grew up, there was no salmon float rods. Like they were all like whips, like for steelhead fishing. And I noticed the last few years, like Lama Glass,
They were
Raven,
called like noodle rods.
Yeah.
Because they were like a noodle.
Yeah. So generally, like as a backstory, if you're not familiar with float rods, generally for steelhead fishing, you're going to be using anything from 11.5 to 13 foot, and they're usually light or medium light. That's generally what you're going to have. And they're rods that can handle like 4 to 10 pound test. Okay. Can you catch a salmon on that? Sure you can. It's going to take you a long time. And you may lose a lot of fish that you can't like pull out of log jams and stuff. So a lot of companies like Lama Glass, they have that red line, that series. That's pretty good. They have mediums now. So this is a medium float rod. It's a 12.5 foot, which I love it. It's perfect size. It's not too short, not too long. And this rod is rated 8 pound all the way up to 15 pound line. It's a meat stick. Now, again, it's not a light rod. But when you hook a salmon on this rod, you can actually turn it. And I love it. And I've recommended it to a few people, and they bought it, and they like it too. And it's not an expensive float rod compared to others. I think it's like, I don't even want to guess right now. I'll link this exact rod in the show notes below. But I've had this rod for 6 years now. Love it. And the reel I have on this, again, if you use a float reel or a spinning reel, doesn't matter. I'd even put a spinning reel on this rod. It would be fine. I think
that's what you started with on this rod. You had a spinning reel on it. Did you not?
No.
Or was that your first float rod?
That was my first one, yeah. But I have a beater float reel. Now, I got this off Kijiji. I know float reels are very expensive. Like, I bought an Islander just as...
The reason I don't own one.
Yeah. So, like, if you talk to a center pin purist and you say that you think an Islander is expensive, they'll laugh at you because an Islander is not expensive for them. Some people spend thousands of dollars, like thousands and thousands of dollars on float reels. Hey, and if that's your thing, that's cool. Okay. Having a $5,000 center pin combo is cheaper than owning a bass boat. And if you don't bass fish, that's your bass boat right there, right? Yeah. But anyway,
the again, perspective wise though, to the average angler who's not like center pin, they are expensive reels because the most expensive spinning reel like you could think of getting, it would be like Shimano Stella, and it costs $1,100 and something bucks.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's a lot for a spinning reel. Like, oh yeah, well, mid range on these is about $1,000.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay.
So even an Islander. So I bought my first Islander. When I bought my first Islander, I got the one with the upgraded bearings, and it was, I want to say, $500, and it was the ABEX 7 bearings. I went to the store recently. They went up like $200. It's like, I get it. If you're an average angler and you're just getting into float fishing, to get that in a rod, you're looking at more than $1,000.
Yep.
So anyway, what I did is I went on Kijiji. Again, I do have an Islander, so I have that as well. I went on Kijiji and I found this Okuma Raw 2. And like, there's so many budget center pins you can get that are like brand new. I think this thing's like, I don't know, it's got to be like $250 at least. But I got it for $70. Like, I'm not saying you'll find one that cheap, but like, look on Kijiji and just find a beater for salmon fishing. You don't need anything precise. Salmon aren't like steelhead. They're not super finicky. Get yourself something that's heavy duty, that's going to handle a beating, and something that you don't mind getting dirty. Because again, if you're fishing skein, this thing's going to get covered in crap anyway.
Yeah.
So I definitely recommend this. I haven't used a lot of cheaper center pins. I bought the Islander for that reason. I'm like, this is going to be my last center pin. I use it for steelhead fishing. I will use it for salmon, but this is the one that I'm not afraid to get dirty. I'll even use this for carp fishing.
Yeah.
So I have two. I have a cheap one and I got a nice one. That's how it works. But anyway, that's my combo, and it's been working great for years.
And a pro tip, because this one still spins, now it's not like perfectly balanced like the Islanders, but it still spins.
It's not bad.
Very, very well. And I remember you telling me the reason why is the thing most people do is they think, oh, to have it spin good needs a lot of grease, a lot of oil.
Yeah.
And if you over oil it, it doesn't spin well at all because it's gumming everything up. So I think this one you put, you had to clean it all up because this one was covered in gunk when you got it.
Yeah, so the bearings were packed with grease.
Yeah.
So I degreased it. And then I put a single drop of oil in it, like actual real oil. Yeah. And the thing spins like a charm. Like, it doesn't, like, if you get a really nice float reel, it can spin for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think when I cleaned up my Islander, it spun for almost 10 minutes. This thing will spin for like a minute and a half.
Yep.
But again,
It's way better than when you got it. So if you find one that's used, a bit of maintenance on them, and maintenance on your reels, on any reel, is very important, and it will make it last for center pins forever.
I agree, especially if you do have a center pin. If you fish a lot, I would definitely recommend periodically throughout the season taking it apart. Maybe not degreasing the bearings, but like make sure there's no like grits of sand in there or anything like that. And at least once a year, do a very thorough cleaning. I actually bought the Islander reel kit, the cleaning kit. It comes with the oil, the grease, a bunch of like cleaning stuff for the reel, and it's like $20, and like it'll last you for years. You're not going to use more than a drop at a time. You could do all your buddies' reels, charge them $10, make a profit. But anyway, other gear that I'd recommend for creek fishing, and I see so many people don't have this, and it annoys the heck of me, is a net. They're like, yes. I just beach the fish, it's fine. And then they beach this fish, and sometimes salmon are huge, and then they like are just flopping on the rocks, hitting their head against the rocks, and then they're holding them out of the water. So now you fought this fish for usually too long because they're using gear that's way too light. The thing's gasping for air, and then you pull it up in the air. Well, they're gasping for water.
Yep. You drag its mouth right through the like sand or rocks that are now filling their gills with all these rocks.
And then you unhook it, you take a bunch of pictures, and then you slide it back in the water. It's like if you have a net. I'm just going to tell you, this is how good it is. You can buy these big, I forget what brand it is, Freybill nets, and they're big, they're deep, and they have a short handle. And they're wading nets, and they will hold a 25-pound salmon, no problem. So I'll be fishing, I'll hook a salmon, and every time you're going to grab that salmon or try to beach it, you've already had it in the net. The net just scoops them up. You keep the fish in the water at like, say like you're at, knee depth of water, you keep the fish in the water, you unhook it, you pull it out for a quick pick, and then you put it back in the net. Take another quick pick, and then you're done. The fish is always in the water, except when you're taking a picture. It's not covered in sand, covered in leaves. We always said this, but like if you're taking a picture of a salmon and it's covered in leaves, sand, or dirt, you did it wrong. Really bad. You need to get a net. And they're not expensive. You can get a net for like $40. Yep. And believe me, you
can get expensive nets, but they're not necessary if you don't have to spend that.
It treats the fish better. If you actually care about fishing, you'll consider getting a net. Also, I'll tell you, if you have a net, you will catch more fish, because like how many times have you literally almost had a fish and you're like, if I had a net, I would have had that fish. Yep. I had this massive brown, probably one of my biggest brown, not my biggest, but one of my biggest.
Yeah, you did catch a nice one.
And I literally had him. I didn't have a net, and I had him pinned to the shore, and he snapped my line, and I was trying to hold him down because I was sliding down the hill in the mud, and he just like shimmied out of my hand and swam away. And I was like, if I had a net, I would have caught that fish.
Yeah.
So after that, I bought like a bunch of nets. I bought like the big salmon net and a little trout net too. I was like, oh my goodness. But get a net. It does help. So anyway, we could literally go off on tangents. Yeah. And we talked about some of the bad stuff about salmon fishing, and it has nothing to do with you. If you're listening to this, we're not talking about you. We're talking about there are deadbeats out there. There are bad ways to catch salmon.
And it might be just if you heard this and you're like, you know what, maybe I am lining fish. You know what? Look at yourself. It might most likely will give you all the benefit of the doubt. Lack of knowledge. That's all it was. And that's a big point of our podcast, is we want to be able to educate people.
We're educating. Yeah. And like, hey, we'll tell you. Some of the fish, we did it. We're going to tell you that's what happened to us. We're going to share with you. So see what happens. But anyway.
One last thing just on this topic of salmon.
Yeah.
So we did talk a lot about the negative stuff. We did talk about positive. What is one of the biggest positives then of someone going salmon fishing in a creek?
I would say, like I said before, I'm not a guide, but I've taken a lot of people out that have never fished. People that you'd never even expect to go fishing. Like some of my friends or family members, and they're like, I can never picture this guy fishing, and I take them out. And just, it blows people's mind. Like sometimes people will be like, oh yeah, I've seen salmon jump up the waterfall. But when you're wading through the water and there's all these salmon, like you're wading through the water and fish are bumping into the back of your leg because there's so many of them. It's just amazing to them. It's amazing seeing them just be like blown away. Yeah. And then when they hook one and the fish goes nuts and it's jumping and lines shooting off their reel and they're just like, what do I do? What do I do? And you're like, run. You run downstream, right? Because it's pulling line off. It's, for me, like, I'd rather take someone and get them on a fish than catch one myself, because it's so much more exciting. It's like, yes, do it. But that, for me, like, I find like the plus is it's a great way to get someone into fishing. Yeah. And it's fairly reasonably priced. Like, you don't need to buy a lot of stuff. You could literally probably spend $200 and be ready to go.
I think it would be, it's the best opportunity you're going to have for the average person out there to catch a big fish. If you're like, when we first started out, it was, I want to catch a lot of fish. Then it was, I want to catch big fish. Now it's like, we want to catch the hard to catch fish.
Yeah.
Like we challenge ourselves, maybe catching those fish, but in a harder way to do it.
Yeah.
So if you are at that stage where like, yeah, I've caught a bunch of stuff, I love fishing at the cottage. I love catching rock bass and sunfish and smallmouth, whatever off the dock. And now you're like, I don't have a boat. I can't do this stuff, but I want to catch like a big fish. Get ready to go salmon fishing. Yeah. You have the opportunity. The average size salmon in our area, like in the GTA that you're going to catch in a creek, is probably about 15 to 20 pounds.
Yep.
The average size. When you hold that thing in a photo, like you're holding a lot of muscle in your hand. It's exciting. Fish. Yeah. So if you are at that stage where you want to see what it's like to catch a big fish, they're most accessible right then, and for probably the best chance you have of getting something like that, either that or carp, whatever you want. And some guys would say carp are more pretty, but I think that a good salmon that's not an old boot is a better looking fish.
Yeah, and that's the thing is too, during the salmon run there's so many stages. Like fish shoot up the creeks as early as like early August. Mm-hmm. So like in the creek there could be half rotted ones as well as dime silver ones in the same pools in the same time, because fish come up at different times. So you can catch, it's like a mixed bag. You're like, oh, I wonder what the next fish will be. A disgusting zombie or...
And that is the nice thing about some of those techniques we talked about, like the fly fishing or lures. You can target a specific fish. Doesn't mean something else might come over and just slam it out of the blue. That could happen still. But you can do your best to focus on the ones that you actually want to catch, which is cool.
Yeah, and for sure. And I was going to kind of go into like where to fish in the creek for salmon.
We're going to have time.
You can, no, I was going to say, you literally just look in the water and you see it. I don't have to tell you where. They're everywhere.
Get some polarized sunglasses.
You can't see the
there's
salmon.
Giant shadows.
Yeah, there's many giant shadows.
Oh, look, there's half a fish sticking out of the water.
So anyway, next week, like right now, a lot of the creeks actually close in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. This podcast we should have done a few weeks ago, but we had, a lot of other camping stuff and salmon stuff to do, but there's still about 2 weeks left to salmon fishing in a lot of areas. And you can still fish down at the river mouths year round generally. Check your regs and make sure. But we actually have a few episodes coming up about fall fishing. We actually have a musky episode coming up, which is pretty cool. And we have it's cool. We have some local tips from guys. We're not having guests on, but they're going to send us some tips and we're going to read them. It's going to be pretty cool. And we have another one about fall fishing for a few other different species. But before we end, I thought we could read a review.
I like reviews.
Yeah, so we got a review.
Unless they're bad.
No, this is a good one. Actually, we don't. We have a lot of good reviews. Yeah, hey, if you haven't left a review yet, go on Spotify and leave us a review. We'd appreciate it. Or go on Apple and give us whatever star you think we deserve. I got this.
Give you a hint. It's 5.
Yeah. So I got this, and I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, but he said, "Yo."
Good start.
Yeah. So anyway, he said, new listener that has crushed every single episode on Spotify. How many is that? 28?
This is 29 that we're recording now.
So this guy literally listened to 28 of them, and I'm hoping he did that over at least, 14 days. I don't know. Anyway, he said, can't express the relaxation the podcast provides when sitting in traffic on the QEW. I was like, yeah, that is stressful.
Man, that sucks.
Hearing the opening music literally drops my blood pressure. Yeah. I think the opening music is hilarious. Yeah. It's hilariously cheesy. It's been huge to learn more and has definitely pushed me into trying out new stuff. So that's a really good review. But I just thought, kind of going on what we were saying, is like, we're not experts. We fish a lot. We have a lot of gear. We try a lot of things. We're happy to to share what we know. We're not going to say like, oh, listen to us, we're experts and all this stuff, but we aim to inspire. People, we've gotten so many messages of people like, you know what, I never thought about using that lure you guys talk about, or I never thought about trying that technique that you guys talked about. And this is just stuff, we're average guys. Like, we're not literally like, insane. We're not like Bob Azumi, So we're trying stuff, and then when it works, we tell you guys. And then if you tried and it works for you, that's amazing. That's literally what we do this podcast for. So anyway, we'd like to thank you for all the reviews. We'd also like to mention we do have a Patreon. Mm-hmm. If you would like to support the show, there are monthly expenses to producing the show every week. And right now, me and Andrew are paying for most of it out of our pocket. Yeah, we're poor. We do have a few Patrons already. There's about 4 or 5 of them thanks again. You know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
We do need more of them, though. And we don't want to sound needy, but we're poor.
If you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
This is just us politely asking.
And you may wonder, because I never knew before, Patreon is basically, it's about $2 a month for, it starts at $2 a month, and you can just donate the $2, and it basically goes towards helping us produce the podcast. So anyway, if that's something you're interested in, definitely check that out. I'll link that in the show notes below. So anyway, I'm excited for next week's episode about fall fishing for musky, because actually I'm going musky fishing really soon. I have a 3-day trip.
Oh, man.
3 days of not catching anything.
Well, if it was anything like our last musky trip, then you're going to wish you brought me along to actually get some in the boat.
Yeah. You know what, though? This time I'll have the whole front boat advantage to myself. Anyway, what's the quote of the week, Andrew?
Quote of the week?
Yeah.
Don't photograph zombie salmon.